coming. It's good to have a good turnout of people. Before I kind of kick off, just to say I'm Felicity Parnham. I'm a parish councillor with Cheltenham Kings Parish Council, and this is the part of a CK Futures initiative, which is the kind of the whole envelope of this is about making climate environment easier for people and helping people with this change journey. So before we kick off, just to say a little bit about housekeeping, we're going to keep the door at the back open just for ventilation. If you want to wear a mask, that's absolutely fine, and toilets are this way. If there is a fire alarm, then there probably is a problem, and I suggest we leave the building, and the fire exits are there and there at the back. Okay, thank you. So, may I introduce Karen Watson, Environmental Partnerships Manager with Cheltenham Borough Council, and Oliver Murrell with Suez.
Yes.
Right, I got that right. So they're going to be with us this evening, and just thank you again. This talk is about recycling, and obviously I'm sure you've got lots of questions about recycling, but the main focus of this is going to be about flexible plastics, but I'm sure Karen will take other questions. So we're going to do this almost like in 3 parts. Karen's going to give us a short presentation, which probably will cover a lot of your questions, and then do a little bit of a consultation, and then finally, if there are any more questions at the end, we'll capture those. So if you have got anything, then obviously there's also a white flip chart at the back that you can write it on. And I think that's it. But the question I did say to Karen when she came in, what is an environmental partnerships manager? And I think these things always sound very grand, so I'm going to leave you with that. So
that's probably the trickiest question, so thank you, Felicity. Well, as Felicity just said, I'm Karen and I'm from Cheltenham Borough Council, and my role is service manager for waste recycling, street cleansing and grounds maintenance across the borough, and we're responsible for strategy and policy. And our service provider is Ubico. Okay. So the orange jacket over there, you'll have seen those guys collecting, that's Ubico. Cheltenham Borough Council, with other local authorities, actually owns Ubico, so it's a local authority company. And whilst it's a local authority company, we do have a contract with them in the same way as we might have with a commercial service provider, but we like to think of it as a partnership. So in terms of delivering the environmental agenda, I'm responsible for managing our partnership with Ubico as opposed to a contract, because we like to think that they're much more flexible than a private contractor might be, and that's what gives us our advantage. So some of the things that we're going to come along to talk about later on as we go through on this, flexibles, we're able to do that because we've got the flexibility with a partnership arrangement, which isn't a rigid contract. So that's my title explained, and that really explains, I think, the Ubico element of it. And they're actually 10 years old this year, so they've been established 10 years. So Cheltenham Borough Council and Cotswold District Council set them up 10 years ago. And throughout the entirety of the COVID pandemic, whilst other local authorities were having to drop services in Cheltenham, we're proud to say that with Ubico's assistance, they managed to keep all the services going. So across town, I don't think anybody would have noticed an issue with collections. So coming on then to what we're here for. So we want to make this really, really informal, and the idea is to help explain to you guys exactly what we're sort of trying to do by way of recycling in Cheltenham, but focusing mainly on plastics. But particularly we want to sort of float with you some ideas around flexibles plastics. And when I finish doing a bit of an intro, I'm going to hand over to Ollie, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're trying to achieve, and then it's going to be over to you guys with a really interactive sort of session about, were we to try and do something in Cheltenham, what on earth would it look like for you, what would you see the problems, how would you like us to shape it? So that'll be sort of the part we get to in due course, which, and please, interrupt, put your hand up, whatever you want to do, but please don't be afraid to sort of ask questions, because that's what we're here for. Anything we don't cover tonight, I've said to Felicity, more than happy to sort of come back to anybody on, that's absolutely fine. But in terms of recycling, very, very quick whistle-stop tour. So, recycling in Cheltenham, you've all seen our vehicles, those sort of vehicles going around Cheltenham, and they collect our recycling. So there are kerbside recyclers. They cost about £138,000 each. We've got 13 of them across Cheltenham, and they're always pretty full. And they usually tip a couple of times a day. And they go back to our Swindon Road depot, where the Household Recycling Centre is. And they, as you can see at the bottom there, they queue up if they end up all there together, and they end up going into the shed and tipping it into great big bays on the floor. Then what happens is we end up putting a lot of that material into some very large bulking lorries, which then go off to reprocessors for reprocessing. And I've got some things here which indicate really where we end up with. So where we're trying to do, particularly with plastics, is we want to end up with materials like this. It gets reprocessed into those sorts of materials. And so the bottle I'm drinking from here with my water, I've had that about 4 months and I keep reusing it. So eventually it'll go into one of these in my box in Cheltenham, because I live in Cheltenham. And then what we'll end up doing is going off to a reprocessor, it gets turned into the PET flake, and then it goes off to be made into another bottle or something else like that. So what we try and do is make sure that everything we collect is recycled as much as possible. So talked about the vehicles, talked about where it goes. I've got a couple of questions around what happens to things that we put in the recycling boxes that you'll all recognise here at Kerbside. So you've got all those boxes and we say plastic and cans in one, please. And what we do when we get to Swindon Road Depot is actually it gets sorted on a pick line. It's a manual sorting process. It goes through a pick line and we separate out aluminium and steel, and then all the plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays go off together to reprocessors and they end up turned into that sort of flake or pellets into other plastic materials. Anything that we can't take, and in Cheltenham we try and keep the messaging really, really simple. If it's plastic, it can go in your box, unless it's flexible plastics, and we'll come on to that because that's quite a big subject in a bit. Black plastic can be a bit challenging because quite often we can't recycle that, and if we do find we've got black plastic in our boxes, it ends up getting separated out by the reprocessor and off it goes, it gets to energy from waste. So we don't actually throw it into landfill. Nothing in Cheltenham that we collect as a Borough Council ends up in landfill, I can promise you that. One of the other questions is around, does any of the plastic we collect end up in a Malaysian plastic mountain? I can promise you it doesn't. We've got very, very strict guidelines we have to adhere to. We have to report to DEFRA in terms of our waste destinations. And there's some information on the board there. There's lots of information on our website, and there's some QR codes around and about if anybody's familiar with using those. And I'm a recent convert, I have to admit. But they will take you straight to the web pages on our website, which show you exactly what we do with all our recycling. But I've got a little bit of a printout here, which is exactly what's on the board there. And it tells me that 29% of our plastics that we collect ends up in Germany to be reprocessed into flake or pellets. 7% ends up in Warsaw, in the country, and then 64% goes to print waste in Cheltenham. So they're a local reprocessing plant. They sort it all out, and it actually goes to one of Ollie's colleagues, actually, that Suez deal with it. They sell it off to them. The reason we do all that, and the reason we do it in boxes, is because what we're trying to achieve is sorted recycling. So I know lots of people say to me, why can't we have a bin like Tewkesbury? Why can't we just chuck it in there? It's much easier. Well, the reason we don't do that, and partly I understand it for residents, you know, I have it at home, you know, I've got a family of 3 children, I have to sort out all their recycling and put it into the boxes too. So I understand it's a little bit more effort, but it means that we've got more recycling that's sorted out, that's less contaminated. And what happens then is that we can sell it for a higher price per tonne. So we get income in that actually offsets the cost of us collecting. So those 13 vehicles we've got that are £138,000 each, we have to fund from somewhere, and that's taxpayers' money. So we have to be very careful about how we're spending that. So we want to get the most money back in to actually offset those costs. So the higher quality recycling that we get, the more money we get in for that. That also means that actually more of that recycling that we collect gets truly recycled. It doesn't end up going energy for waste. Because what we want to do is keep as much of that recycling into the system as possible and not end up getting rid of it. So I've got a couple of questions which I'm just going to cover off very briefly, which Felicity very kindly forwarded on to me. So I think one of the questions is, do we need to take the lids off our glass jars? No, you keep the lids on. The reprocessors, in the processing that they do, they will separate that off and it will go into separate streams. So lids can stay on glass jars. Let's have a look. When putting a box in the cardboard recycling, does all the tape have to be removed? It's great if you can, but it's not essential. The contamination tolerances we've got with our reprocessing contracts means that they can accept some of that, so it's not the end of the world. If you can take it off, great. If not, then that's fine. Do we have to sort the recycling into their different types, or can they all be put in one box? Well, if you've only got one recycling box, of course you're going to mix it, and the crews at Kerbside will sort that into the compartments on the vehicle for you. Not a problem. If you've got more than one box, it takes them ages to stand there. They block the traffic, you know. Those 13 vehicles, £138,000, also have 3 people usually sitting in there that we have to fund. So what we try and do is get around as quickly as possible. So that's why we say, please, if you've got more than one box, please sort it. So your plastic in cans in one box, your glass in another, paper in another, and then obviously we've got the blue bag for cardboard. So that's why we say that, and that really helps us in terms of getting around the town quickly. Let's have a quick look on here before we move on. So let's see, Tetra Pak is another one. So Tetra Pak is your orange juice cartons and things like that. Well, it's such a sandwich of different materials, it is very expensive to actually reprocess into its different items that can be recycled. And at the moment, there aren't too many places that take it. So we have looked at whether we can take it at kerbside. At the moment, I haven't got a solution, not that's cost effective for us. You could take them to bring banks around Cheltenham, and a company called Ace take them for us. But that was an initiative we had quite a while ago that was partly funded. We can't at the moment take it at kerbside, but hold that thought, because we are looking at what we can do. I can't make promises on timelines, but we are looking to try and achieve that for everybody. I think that's that list done, Felicity. Unless there's any other quick questions. Go on then.
Actually, the advice is to put paper and bottles together. We collect them at home separately and then put them together, because that's Cheltenham Borough Council's advice. And actually, we will now keep them separate.
Well, the advice on the website is if you've got one box, and because lots of people haven't got room for lots of boxes, so if you've only got a reasonable quantity of paper and glass that fits in one box, please can you just separate it in that one box? It makes it a lot easier. The crews, literally, if you picture the crews, they just grab the paper, chuck it into one compartment, they'll lift the box up and they'll tip to actually put the rest of the glass into, obviously, that container too. If you've got a lot of glass, and quite often, depending on what I'm cooking at home, I might have a whole box full of glass, and actually I keep my paper separate. It is easier rather than having what we would describe as a lasagna of glass and paper, because the crews have got to go through, and actually sometimes, you know, when it gets chucked in, you picture the guys who've got gloves on, if you've got a glass bottle or a glass jar that's broken, they've got to put their hands in it. So it's part of its health and safety, the other part is speed. Sorry,
do I understand therefore you would prefer glass below paper?
Glass below paper, definitely, so we can take off the paper. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a request somewhere for us to do that. I'm sure I picked that up.
Depending on the quantity you've got, ideally, if you've got them in separate boxes, that's great. If you haven't got the space,
No,
if they're just separated out in that as much as possible, then it helps the
I'm ashamed to
guys.
say, given the proportion of it that's alcohol, that we have quite a lot of glass.
I think a lot of people took solace in, didn't they, over the COVID
The
period.
other thing, card for the blue bag.
Yeah.
Any form of card, or is it really sort of, brown
Your
packaging?
cereal boxes, your grey card, and any of the corrugated brown, but
Right.
preferably what
Egg
fits
boxes?
in. Egg boxes, absolutely. They're
That's
cardboard.
cardboard.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got 4 recycling boxes, and I've got to get them out down quite a long alleyway to the front of the house, and I do several of the elderly neighbours as well. Do you provide trolleys at all?
We don't, I'm afraid. We don't. Lots of people do source their own trolleys and deal with it that way. I understand it's a slight pain to be carrying them, but also a lot of people say, actually, if you gave us a bin like 2 weeks ago, I don't know where I put it. So it's a tricky one, that is. Right, just to move on quickly then. So in terms of talking plastics, which is what we really want to try and focus on today, if that's okay. I don't know what anybody does coffee pods at home, but anybody that has coffee pods at home, obviously they're an element of plastic. Some of them are aluminium as well. But I've got some leaflets over there. If anybody wants to sign up to Podback, you can go on the website or feel free to grab one of those. But one of the reasons we introduced that, and we were one of the first local authorities to do it in the country actually in Cheltenham, is because we want to make sure we maximise what recycling we actually take at the kerbside. Plastics is obviously a real issue in the environment, so we're doing the coffee pods as well, so that's another sort of source of getting rid of plastics, but obviously that's quite a small tonnage. Right, I think probably we're okay to move on to Ollie, who's going to give you a quick whiz through, and then we'll jump back in. But as we go through, please feel free just to ask any questions, and we'll try and deal with as we can. And I've got to stand within my line, so I'm out of the camera, so I'm back to myself.
Brilliant. Okay, all right, so hi everyone, I'm Ollie. I'm a project delivery manager with Suez. So if you haven't heard of us, we are pretty much a big waste management company, a waste and recycling company. We work with lots of businesses, local authorities, including Cheltenham. Part of the work that we do, we kind of have a consultancy arm, and that's the part of the business that I work for. So we do a lot of work with big brands, retailers, producers of packaging, reprocessors and local authorities. So we provide sort of advice and guidance, and we run some projects as well. So at the moment we are doing some work with a range of different authorities across the UK, kind of looking into flexible plastics. So flexible plastics are those kind of tricky, hard to recycle things which you may probably put in your general waste bins. So yeah, as I say, we're working with a lot of local authorities to try and figure out exactly what we can do with that material. So if I just go on to the next slide. So there are a few different things you can do already with flexible plastics. You may have seen flexible plastic collection points at your local supermarkets.
Excuse me, could you just explain what flexible plastic is?
Sure, okay. we've got some goodies to come to later, a bit of show and tell. So flexible plastics, they are your kind of tricky to recycle plastics. So they're your carrier bags, your bread bags, salad bags, can even be toothpaste tubes. Pretty much think of anything you don't put in your box, which you consume at home.
I'm going to shoure you we're going to come on to a lot of detail about that in a little bit. So
we'll go through
that
a full list later on, but it's a huge amount of materials. So it's about 25% of all the products that we buy and consume. So a massive amount of material that's not currently being recycled at home. So I think about 6% is recycled across the UK. Is that globally? Really small amount of flexible plastic is actually recycled. But you know, if you're like me, you're flooded with it when you come home from the supermarket. So you can actually take it back to the supermarket at the moment. So I have actually pinched that photo from Tesco's, don't tell them. But you can also take it back to Co-op, Sainsbury's, as I think Morrison's introducing it as well. Obviously this isn't ideal. The end goal is to introduce flexible plastic collections at your homes. So the end goal is for us to put it out at the curbside for you to, you know, for our recycling crews to collect it and process it that way. In order to get there, we need to do some work. So at the moment, reprocessors, collection authorities, end destinations, the people who make the flake products here, aren't ready yet. So we need to kind of figure some things out before we can actually get to that stage. As part of the reason I'm here today with Karen is to have a chat with you about, you know, how we're going to do this at the curbside, how we're going to do this at home to kind of bypass this supermarket take-back option and figure out the solution going forward. So, you may be aware of the Environment Act, but I'm just going to touch on it really, really quickly. So the government is actually going to require all local authorities, all local councils to collect the same set of materials. So wherever you are in the UK, your local council will have to collect the same set of materials. How they collect it may differ, but it will have to be the same set of materials. And specifically, the one we're talking about, flexible plastics, will have to be included in your curbside collections by March 2027. That's hot off the presses, and it's like 3 days old, that news. So you heard it here first. So yeah, it is coming, but we don't know how yet. So we're doing some work with local authorities to kind of engage people, figure out how we're going to do that at the curbside. So we are going to run some trials in the future, or we hope to run some trials in the future. But you know, to get to that stage, we need to get some feedback, figure out how we present it at home, what bin do we put it in, how do we collect it, how do we reprocess it, how do we sort it, and that's kind of where I'm hoping all of you will kind of help us out a little bit. So some things to consider. Reprocessing is a little bit difficult with flexible plastic at the moment, so it's quite hard to identify at sorting facilities, so it's very likely that when we do start collecting at the curbside, we're going to have to keep it in another separate bag. But as I say, we're not too sure how we're going to progress, so yeah, we're hoping you're going to tell us the best way to move it forward, and we'll take these ideas from Cheltenham and another range of different authorities that we're working with to figure out how to implement these collections. So,
Next slide.
time for some show and tell?
Just a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, I take it to Co-op, I take it to Tesco's.
Yes.
What do they do with it?
Good question. So depending on which supermarket you take it to, they'll work with a range of different reprocessors. So the Co-op, for example, work with a company called J-Pass, based somewhere near Birmingham, aren't they? And they will turn it into PP flake, sort of like this. So they will filter it out, they'll shred it down, and they'll turn it into a flake type material, which can be recycled into new products. So it's quite easy for them to do that from the material from Tesco's, because you've done the hard work for them, you've collected it into a single stream, so it's easy for them to wash it and then reprocess it. When you start putting it in loose with other items, other kind of rigid hard plastics, which is absolutely what we want to avoid for now, it's much harder to separate. So Co-op work with J-Pass, Tesco's have a different reprocessor, I can't remember off the top of my head. I can't remember. But there are a range of different processes out there. So they can be recycled. They're tricky to recycle, but they can be recycled. So there are markets for them, and more sort of processes are coming online. Oh, loads of questions. I'll go front first.
Going back a stage,
Yeah.
you were talking about rigid plastics. Are there any rigid plastics that you shouldn't put in your bin? I mean, children's toys,
No.
buckets.
So if you think of a household recycling centre, they've got a hard plastics
So
stick in there.
hang on, so where is the line between rigid plastic and hard plastic?
So if you, for the sake of collections in Cheltenham, if you think quite simplistically, if it's not going to fit in my recycling box easily, it's probably something I can't put in there. So things like what do we get at the HRC? We get large flower pots, we get children's slides, we get broken boxes, those types of things. The great big, you know, if you paint your fence with the preservative, you'll often get those great big plastic buckets, those sorts of things, and old watering cans, that sort of thing. So that's what we're taking there. But obviously that's not something that you're going to think, that's going to fit in my box here. So that's why it's intuitive for you not to be putting it in there. So it is only the bottles, pots, tubs, trays that need to come in here. So that's where we are on hard plastics. So just moving on a bit. So we did some public consultation a while ago. Can I just come back in 1 minute? And I promise I will. So we did some public consultation a little while ago, and actually some of the feedback we got is that actually residents did want us to collect things like Tetra Pak, but also the flexible plastics. So we've known for a little while that our residents in Cheltenham want to do that. So we've been quite keen to try and understand how we could do that. Then the Environment Act has come along and actually said, you know, in March 27, we're going to have to do it anyway. So talking with industry experts, people like Ollie from Suez and his colleagues, actually, we were trying to get an engagement around actually how can we make sure we can do something in Cheltenham. So that's really why we're here today. We want to talk to you about if we're going to put flexible plastics into the collection stream at kerbside for you, so you don't have to take it back to Tesco's or to the Co-op or any of the other supermarkets. How might we do that for you, and what are the confusions around flexible plastics in terms of terminology? So if we wrote to you and said we're going to do X, Y and Z, what wording do we need to use for you to understand what on earth we're on about, given the complexity of plastics in terms of terminology, and particularly around flexibles? So we're just about to do a bit of show and tell, but I'm going to go back to that gentleman for his question, and then we can talk flexibles, plastics, and then as we go through, we would really like to hear from you about what on earth it means to you, because actually if I'm trying to introduce this across Cheltenham, I need to make sure it's going to make some sense to you guys, because I'm sat at home in my house in Cheltenham, and I'm going to have to do it, but actually, you know, I live and breathe this, but actually you guys have all got different types of lives, and how do we make it easy for you, and that's our goal. So, sorry, sir.
Could we just talk about why we would actually do this? Is there an environmental benefit to recycling the hard-to-recycle plastics? The reason I ask this is because I spoke with tried to speak with TerraCycle about a year ago. It was quite a frustrating conversation because they couldn't say what the benefits of their operation was, whether in fact there was a benefit from a carbon footprint perspective.
So are you talking about the plastics that go in your recycling box, or are you talking about the other types like the children's slide and all that sort of thing?
Probably both. I mean, I'd imagine there is a benefit to recycling PET and glass and aluminium, but when we got into the harder to recycle plastics, and they tend to be flimsy stuff as well, I'm not sure what they actually can be processed into, which is of value. What is the actual benefit, and is it worth doing it?
So we'll come on to part of that, but actually, and interestingly, if we talk about food waste, so we've got a lot of food waste in our bins, and there's some leaflets over there about indigestion, where our food waste in Cheltenham goes to for reprocessing. One of the things that they have problems with is actually when we've got too many plastic bags, they can't keep that in that environment, because actually part of what they do as a byproduct of their process is actually a liquid fertiliser, which is a soil enhancer. Now if you've got too many little bits of plastic in that, you're putting plastic into the ground, in the environment, which doesn't ever break down. That isn't great for wildlife or anything like that. So in terms of collecting and doing something with it, we would always say there's a benefit to that. But you're right, we need to be careful of these hard to deal with items. Is where is the balance on the carbon footprint? And I don't have an easy answer for you, and I'm not going to pretend to. It has to be looked at in terms of individual materials, where you are, what your local reprocessing facility is. So for example, if I'm collecting something in Cheltenham, the only place I can recycle it is way up in the north of Scotland. You do have to question it, actually, is it valuable to do that, or are you better selling it to an energy for waste plant? So you're absolutely right, a load of those considerations need to come into play.
Yeah. I just think there are lots of things that we could focus on, like transport and home energy and lots of other things that are really significant. If this really has no benefit or marginal benefit, why would we, because it's going to take time and attention from lots of people, so why would we go down?
So the only thing I would say to you on that is actually, if we're looking at the environment and climate change generally, there are lots of things we all need to do, from remembering actually to turn that dripping tap off and turn the light switch off, which my kids still forget about. But, you know, it's all those little steps that help. So this isn't saying this is the most important thing to do, and actually worrying about whether we've got energy heat pumps, etc. at the home, and actually what we're doing in terms of sorting our green energy. It's not saying this is more or less important than that. This is something that, in our opinion, is significant and we ought to be trying to do. So as a local authority, we are very keen to make sure, and the government have mandated us to actually say you are going to be required to do this. So we've got to find a way of doing it. Now, part of the collaboration with Suez here is actually how can we effectively do that? So it is understanding with a carbon footprint, etc. How do we make it work properly? So that's financially, so actually it's not crippling to a local authority to do this, but actually there is an environmental impact, because the last thing we'd want to do is actually increase our carbon footprint significantly as a result of doing something. So anything we do try and look at things like that. So may I say that's the last question before I go on to show and tell. So
just very quickly, just following on from what Steve said, that you say it's, the government's mandated it, but they haven't mandated you recycle it, they mandate you collect. So it's still, it'd be very interesting to see, is it better for the whole of life carbon for you to take it to the incinerator as opposed to doing all this processing you're going to have to do? Or is that going to be better? Because in the end, what a lot of us here are really concerned is basically about carbon emissions. And I know the carbon emissions from the incinerator, but is it less or more? I would have thought you'd have an analysis of the whole of life of the actual process.
Well, in truth, the reason we're here today is because actually we're at the cusp of what we're going to do about this. So actually, we are looking at, if we're going to collect that, how does it look like for you guys? And on Ollie's side, there's a whole range of other things in terms of analysis that we're going to have to do at the other end as part and parcel of this. But we have to try things to know whether it's actually going to be useful or not. So we're at the point of looking to try this. So if I go on to a quick show and tell here, if you want to dip in with the different products,
sure.
that's where we're coming in.
Sorry, I think lady here had a question hand up as
Sorry.
well.
Could I just ask, please, about flexible? Because I did understand that the plastics we could take to places like Tesco for the last, 10 years or so, had to be like carrier bags or stuff that you could stretch.
Yeah.
Polythene.
Yeah.
And that they weren't taking plastic like I would describe as cellophane or non.
That's
and
correct.
you're saying flexible. Now, are you also meaning what the co-op is now taking, which is things like crisp packets, which to me is rigid and not flexible?
So
because I'm getting very confused.
So what the supermarkets are doing is what they're doing. This will be separate, and what we're looking to try and do at
But
Kerbside.
you're only looking then to be collecting flexibles.
So if I go onto my show and tell with Ollie's assistance, we'll go through. So this is actually what I've collected in my home. I've got a family of 3 at home, and it isn't everything by any means, and it's just what I've collected in 1 week. So we're going to pull it out and see the random things. Now, you guys will have all sorts of other things that I don't have in here, and there'll be other things at home actually which didn't quite make it in here. So we're going to pull it all out, and Ollie's going to sort of narrate as we're pulling out. But here's some examples. You know, that came from an Amazon package. You know, that's a
Amazon
delivery
delivery bag.
So we've got, that's some cane chips. We like those oven chips, like kids do. You know, that's obviously some sort of...
You're more sort of
And
crinkly
that's not
type.
stretchy.
It's not stretchy, is it? It's crinkly.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
And you touched on one of the most important things there. It's really difficult to describe this material. So what we also want to figure out is what you're calling this material. So we might call it flexible, the co-op's calling it soft plastic, somebody else is calling it plastic bags and wrapping. You know, a really important part of the work we're doing is trying to figure out what to call this material. Because crisp packets are included, toothpaste tubes are included, cat food pouches are included, microwave rice pouches are included. Sure, hopefully some of those will come up as we go through. Bubble wrap's included, plastic bags, so stretchy, crinkly. Well, there you go. Roast beef.
We like roast beef in our house, there you go. It's an insight into my world.
But for years, the advice has been that polythene is something that in effect would kill the process dead. So polythene is an absolute no-no.
With the current process, potentially, yes. But in the future, that will be completely different. So all of our sorting facilities will have to cope with this material. So, we're doing this work early to inform these sorting facilities on how they have to change going forward. Local councils are going to start collecting this, and they're not going to employ waste contractors who don't sort this material.
So all this is flexible plastic?
All of this is flexible plastic, yeah.
You might have a cat food pouch as well. I spoke to a lady a little while back who was really concerned about what to do with the cat food pouches, but that's the flexible.
I live in Morrison, and they collect these, but when I get back home, some say recyclable, and others say not recyclable. And they're kind of slightly
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd always say check your local council website for what is recyclable in your home curbside recycling bin. What is technically recyclable is different to what your council will collect for recycling. So we can recycle all of these things, the technology's just not there yet. Oh, look at that, coffee grounds. So it's aluminium lined, that one is. That's still flexible plastic, so it's got a layer of aluminium in it, and it's got a plastic layer on it. A little bit more tricky, but it is still technically recyclable if you have the right
Carry
process.
bags and things.
So huge amount of materials.
So what would you call that? Because obviously if we're going to try and collect it at kerbside, then all this is something that we're looking at and exploring and really keen to try and do. And we'd have to do it as a small trial to start with, and so that, and I don't know when we're going to do this, but we're really quite serious about trying to do something if we can get it to be the right thing, and obviously financially get it stuck up in Cheltenham. But that's a sample of a week's worth of something from my house. So I look at some of those things and think, actually, I don't know whether Ollie's going to say that's flexibles or not. So actually there is huge confusion that I've got around some of this. So in terms of what you would describe it as, I've heard the word stretch you about some of it. If we're saying actually all these sorts of things could go into, and we're not suggesting, I don't think, that actually you're going to put it into your recycling box with all your other pots, tubs and trays. We're thinking, how I brought this here, it was in a bag like that sort of size tied up. Actually, we could probably cope with that sort of thing, and that's sort of in our minds what we're thinking of. But I know that when I was doing this for a week at home, I had that perched on the edge of my kitchen chair, and every now and again some twit went past and actually knocked it on the floor and picking it up and put it there and thinking, where am I going to put this? It's quite peculiar stuff. And if you just balance a half-empty one in your box, actually it's not. So how do you think that we would need to be dealing with that, and what do you call it? So should we just talk about...
The only thing we can do with the contents of that box is take it back to the supermarket.
At the moment, that's all you can do. And you can't take all of this in there either. Anything that equals a bag of one sort or another you can take effectively, so that they won't take all sorts of cellophanes and lots of that. Lady's absolutely right, you can't do all that. So they're very specific about what you can do, and that's because of the processing difficulties fundamentally.
I'm shifting my position a bit as I listen to you, because I've always been rather cautious, because there's a sort of, it may be a mythology out there, which is that if you make a single mistake,
Yes.
your entire green box for the fortnight is invalid and will go and be buried in a hole in the ground. To put it at its worst. I know you don't need buried, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm shifting towards thinking, if in doubt, risk it. Whereas where I've been before was, if in doubt, don't risk it, and it's tended to go in the general waste. Now, is that a reasonable response to say, if in doubt, risk it?
Yeah, in terms of our policy in Cheltenham, we say no side waste, please. So in your larger than this little example we live in, if you put an extra black bag out, you'll probably have a no side waste sticker put on there, and you get 3 chances to do that, and we'd like to talk to you about what you can do to reduce in your bin. But in terms of the recycling box, you may have seen, pink round stickers put on boxes around about town, and that's where maybe people have put the wrong thing in. So if you don't sort it at all, we'll say something like, please will you sort this, because it really helps us do the right thing. Actually, the crews are pretty reasonable and understanding that actually we don't always get it right. My husband often puts the wrong thing in, and I don't always spot that, and it goes out, the kids do too, we're all human, and it takes time, we're all busy. The crews say, pots, tubs and trays and the cans in one box, please. If there's the odd glass jar sitting on the top, they'll probably take that out. But you might get a sticker to say, actually, you've mixed it all up, please don't do that next time. And they'll give you a chance for them to come back. It might not be until the following fortnight, but they will take it. They won't say, well, we're going to throw it away.
That's not really been my problem.
No.
I think I know, if I've got a yogurt carton, it goes in there. If I've got a glass bottle or jar, it goes in there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sort of product containers where we look at it and we're not sure.
Yeah, so the crews, if there was an awful lot of something like that left in a box, they would put a contamination sticker on your box and leave it, in which case most people phone up the council and say, oh, I put X, Y and Z in, is there a problem with that? And they'd explain what can and can't
But
be.
if I've made 1 or 2 mistakes, it'll be sorted.
Yeah, usually.
Fine.
And the tolerances
that's reassuring.
So our reprocessors have got quite, our contracts and they've got tolerance levels set into it. So if there's a certain percentage of the raw material that goes there, that is acceptable. So that's what we do try and say. If we can sort it as best as we can, that really, really helps. But at the end of the day, none of us is perfect, and the odd thing does go awry. So we try and be fairly reasonable. And if you ever have any queries, do phone the council and say, look, what's gone wrong with this, and we'll try and get that sorted out. But I hope that doesn't happen often.
Thanks.
So to get back to our real tricky trauma of flexibles then, these are all some crunch and some don't, and make different noises, some stretch and some don't. So actually, if we're talking about all this, and also perhaps thinking about, you know, crisp packets and was it cat food pouches and that sort of thing, how would you describe that? What words would you like us to use to say, dear resident, from whatever date you can start putting this in this sort of type of bag, and it needs to be these types of materials. What would make some sense to you guys?
So I wondered if we should flip it round. There's you know, Tesco's, Richmond sausages, or whatever, are making a fortune out of us. Why not expect the manufacturer to put on the back a big circle that says FP in pink and everything? We don't have to make that decision. We look at it, we see FP, and we go straight in. There is no then that, oh, is it big, is it small, is it crinkly, is it whatever?
And I'm in that camp entirely. That's
So
down the road.
So they're making money. They've got what, 5 years to make this change on the back of their products.
So
You
going
can't say
forward,
a big surprise.
with EPR and DRS, actually producers will be required to, generally speaking, use packaging which is recyclable. There is this big dilemma, isn't there, about, you know, I mean, I look at it myself, and I work in this industry, and there's all sorts of different symbols on the back of something, and you think, what does that actually mean? Is that helpful to me? Because actually, and I know explaining to my kids, some of which are grown up, they haven't got a clue about something, and they say it doesn't make any sense to me at all. What am I supposed to do? We regularly have questions like that. But at the moment, we're trying to work out what terminology we might be able to use so we can get a trial going at the moment in Cheltenham. So down the road, and I'll come to you in a minute, sir, down the road, you know, we would hope that actually, that across, and it has to be, it's going to be a global thing, isn't it? But certainly across this country, we're going to have something which helps us with the symbols to help us all understand that. But we're not quite there yet, so that is down the road. So, that, you know, we'll hope that that is coming, and we'll hope that's coming very quickly. But there's a lot of complexity, and I'm sure you'll go into that around how you do that with different types of materials on these things. But sorry, Sue, you had a question.
Thank you. Look, on the basis that all items can be recycled, everything can be recycled, but there's an economy of scale here. So really isn't it a question of the economics of investment? I mean, not worrying about this material, that's slightly different plastic there, that's a different plastic, forget that. What about the investment? Technology.
So are you thinking the
Surely.
Cheltenham Borough Council doing this, are you? Or
I'm sorry?
are you thinking about the investment for Cheltenham Borough Council doing this?
Well, all aspects, yes, the council as well.
So obviously Cheltenham has to watch what it's spending, and we'd have to be careful about what we're investing in. That has to be a good payback. Part and parcel of what we're looking to try and do is actually, you know, help with the government's thinking around how they're going to introduce it for all local authorities across the country by March 27. And that's just one of the reasons, you know, we engaged with Ollie around actually what might we do to help with the government's thinking around this so actually they can get it right. So part of the trial that we would be thinking about going into would actually be to help inform some of that, because obviously you've got to try things to know what will and won't work to make sure you can do it on a big enough scale for the government, perhaps with, you know, investment in infrastructure and that sort of thing, that actually makes all this cost effective. Because you're absolutely right, you can't do some of these things on a very small scale cost effectively.
No,
you know,
but this is, we're going to have to be thinking outside the box.
Yeah. So we're on the cusp of actually, this is a little beginning of a journey, and we're looking at getting way down the road where everybody's doing it, but it's baby steps in terms of how we're going to get there.
But I know we get very excited about carbon footprints, naturally. Well, dealing with aluminium, for example, you've got to heat it up to dispose of the water, so that's already you're affecting your carbon footprint.
And
So
I take
that's
your
one
point.
of what's sorry?
I take your point, sir, around that. But if we could just restrict this around our plastics and the carbon footprint, I think is such a big subject. Perhaps you need another session on that one, if I'm really honest. If that's all right with you, Felicity. Sorry.
What do you call, what's the generic term for the plastics you collect at the roadside?
So it's our pots, tubs and trays.
Does it have a more generic name
Well,
than that, like soft plastics?
You
As
could call
opposed
it
to the
PET, you could
hard
call it
plastics
LDPE. We've got a load of acronyms here which mean nothing to most people because they're all made of different things. So in terms of a collective term, it is plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays, and that's how simplistic it is. This is all different types of materials though, so what we're looking at is trying to understand how we might deal with that.
Well,
sorry.
with respect, so is the stuff that goes into the boxes is in a huge mixture of different.
The thing is, if I
types of
said to you a
stuff.
plastic bottle, then if it looks like a bottle, it's probably going to go in here. If I say it's a plastic pot, actually you'd think of your yoghurt pots and those sorts of things, and actually it makes some sense to you. But actually with this, we're not quite sure how we're going to call that. So we're talking about, in terms bandied around, what have you've got bandied around so
I mean, if
far?
I said plastic bag, would you think cat food pouch?
No.
Food wrap? So that lady there is desperate for a question, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, can all get quite technical, and I've just been sitting thinking, all I would like is somebody who does those really nice little drawings that like a child can relate to, and it just gives some examples, so that I can look at that, and it's just so straightforward. Because I think that then can be understood by everybody.
Yeah, I think you're right. We need
And
to
then
do
we
some
can think more
visuals.
examples for ourselves, but if there were like, really like quite engaging little pictures of things like cat food pouches and
Yeah.
carrier bags and such like, I
So
think that would get us
definitely
all
visuals.
started.
Yeah.
And it, even children can relate to that. And children take a lot of this very seriously and would, very happy with like little cards that they could then go and see.
Yeah. Okay, so if we leave that for a moment in terms of what we're calling that, so do you want to say something?
I was just ask, could we have an app? Could we have an app where it's got pictures of all sorts of plastics, and you simply, you bring up your app, you scroll through, or maybe you take a photo of it, and it marries it up. Is there some kind of app that we could have, which is kind of a yes and no app, if you like?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, we can take that away and think about that as an idea. But what happens to my mum who doesn't want to bother with an app? How do I explain to somebody like my mum who actually needs to understand what happens with some of this? So, there's lots of different mechanisms, isn't there? So if we move on from what we're calling this, and say we're collecting things like that in a bag like that, which is going to go separately, would you at home want to be putting it into a cardboard bag or something like that? Because presumably, you might have one of those a week, so 2 a fortnight, and if we're fetching it every fortnight with our recycling. Would you want to put it into one like a cardboard bag if we had a different colour one? Would you want to put them inside a recycling box? What would work for you guys, do you think? What would be your preference? We're just trying to get a bit of a steer here as to...
The recycling box would blow everywhere if it came off, because it would be so large.
So if it was in one of those
It's
tied
something
up...
you've got to tie up.
You don't really want to give us more plastic,
No.
do you?
But
So
that-
you've got to give us something permanent and reusable.
So in an ideal world, we don't want to give you anything to put it in, we'd like to reuse something that you've already got.
We
But
don't get that.
We don't get plastic bags anymore.
Right.
I use like a bag that's covered in water because I do it every week. I've always got something to put it in. Like a chip bag.
We don't have,
Yeah.
we don't have
Like a
plastic
chip
bags.
bag.
No, we don't have chips.
No.
Bread?
Nothing's a bag. Salad bag.
So assuming you had something of that ilk or something by way of a chip bag or something you're putting in.
Compostable now, we put them in the compost.
Excellent. So would you want to put it into something like a cardboard
Yes.
bag? Or would you like to put it in something like your recycling box with a lid on? What would work best? Can we have a show of hands? Bag or box?
Bag.
But sealable.
So hands up for boxes.
Can I just ask how you would, I don't know how they do it at the moment, know when you do like batteries or textiles, how they would know what.
A manual sort, and you can see, you'll be surprised, I'll come on to that. Hands up for bags then, have we got more or less? Have we, a bit more for bags, would you say?
Slightly more for bags.
So if you've got one of these types of things and you're gathering up something like that, you think that might be better in terms of being able to put them out? Okay, that's helpful, so bags are fine.
And is it going to have to be sealed though?
Is it?
Yes.
Is it to something? Because
If it goes into something like that, it's going to have to be, it'll blow everywhere, won't it? We have problems in the wind. It's a bit like Chicago here, isn't it, for some reason, with the way the wind goes. So anything you put in would have to be tied up. We couldn't not do that. You'd have to be tied up. And it'd have to go into something which had some sort of lid on it, which meant if that blew over on its side, it's not all going to come tumbling out. So there are lots of things for us to think about. To go to that lady's comment about how do the crews know if actually your little bag there's got batteries in, actually it's surprisingly easy when you're collecting from hundreds and hundreds of houses every day and you're opening up your recycling box and you spot actually there's a few batteries in the bottom of that, or actually there's a bag of textiles. It's quite a different feel. Now obviously if the bag is something you can't see through, actually there's a bit of a squish test that goes on, and they don't, generally speaking, have too much of an issue. But the way it goes into the compartment for those sorts of things is it goes into a separate containment at the bulking shed at Swindon Road, so there can be then the manual sorts. If there's a doubt, they can open it up there. So that's how they know, that's how they'd then be able to know.
I was just thinking between plastic, I guess plastic and...
Yeah, so that's how they know on that. So lady back in the blue.
With your sort of crinkly plastics,
Crinkly plastics, that's another term. Crinkly plastics.
I would have thought that the bubble pack basically was more rubbery, because originally, as you say, if it crunched up and stayed put, you do have slightly rubbery, and you could put it with plastic bags. And I wouldn't have put plastic bags in with your crinkly stuff, because it supposedly gets recycled as a plastic bag. And with the sort of, like the food products, obviously you've got the film on the top, which would go with that.
Yeah.
So it's all right. So presumably you've got to rinse anything that's had
wouldn't want to be doing that and cutting
No,
yourself.
what I'm
off,
saying
yeah.
is, you know,
Yeah.
and I was a cat pouch, obviously you
Yeah.
wouldn't rinse that out as you would with the tin. So
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more sort of, you know, not that you've got to do something, but it's just, as I say, the crinkly plastic is what I would understand by this sort of sub-plastic, like cellulose, like something that's not rubbery with scrunch up.
Okay, so,
It's slightly,
so we've got crinkly. So
prickly.
can we have any shout out of words? So we've got crinkly, we've got stretchy, non-rigid,
Thin plastic.
thin,
Floppy.
floppy.
Because if it's stretchy, I would have thought it's more like a plastic bag that you put it with plastic bag.
But you're actually confirming something to me, that councils don't seem to sing off the same hymn sheet insofar as we go to see family in Hertfordshire, different coloured boxes, different coloured uses. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, it doesn't compare to anything in this area. And I would have thought if there was a general sort of national thing about this, we do that, that would make life a lot easier for starters.
But we may be moving
For
to
instance,
something
did
like
you know
that.
you put antifreeze in a black bin? Apparently, that's how you dispose of it. I didn't know that.
It does indeed, and you're right, absolutely. And if we could focus on what we're trying to do in Cheltenham, I'd be ever so grateful, because I can't explain why. Over years and years, we've all done so many different things, and we've all suddenly now just decided with the Environment Act we should try and be more consistent. But you're absolutely right, there aren't sensible answers, and there's no point in pretending there are. All I can say is what we've done in Cheltenham is within our budget and how we've done that, and following where we think is the right environmental requirements for all that. So if we get back to where we're trying to look at, I mean, do you think it would be, if we can put aside the carbon footprint and all those sorts of things, the financial elements of it, we can make sure that's all squared, do you think on the whole, actually trying to collect, and I have to say I have loads of this, do you think trying to collect that and recycle that is a good idea or a bad idea? Show of hands for a good idea.
Who would do it? Show of hands.
So who would participate if we said actually, you know, this is how you do
Where
it?
does it go at the moment? Presumably it's landfill.
It goes into your refuse bin, and then it goes down the road to Javelin Park where it gets burnt energy for waste, so it turns into electricity. So that's what happens.
Unless you
at the
take it
moment.
to a supermarket, in
Yeah.
which case they send it to a recycler. And that's what, obviously, if we did introduce curbside collections, we would send it to a reprocessor.
So in Cheltenham it doesn't go to landfill?
No municipal waste that we
That's
collect in
okay.
Cheltenham goes to landfill. So anything like that, I mean, at the moment, at home, I'm just an ordinary person living in Cheltenham with a family, and because I can't put that in my recycling box, I have to put it in my bigger bin of that at home, and I know what the crews do. It goes back into their vehicles, it drives it down to Javelin Park, and that's what happens at the moment. So at least it turns into electricity, but actually in an ideal world, if we've got that we can turn into another material to save the energy that goes into producing it in the first place being wasted, and actually we can do something with all the constraints which you've all quite reasonably said, you know, carbon footprint, the energy usage, all those sorts of things, and the cost envelope. Wouldn't it be a better idea to perhaps try and do that if we can?
I think there's another question, Karen, which is if there wasn't an environmental benefit to this, is it still a good idea? Because the assumption that's being made and the question asked is that this is a good thing to do, and I wonder whether actually there is a case.
Well,
So I think the question is, if the case doesn't exist, do people still want to do it?
Well, the government have decided that actually it's the right thing to do for the
To
environment.
collect the
To
material?
collect this sort of materials, which is why they're mandating from 27. But part and parcel of what we're looking at with this sort of collaboration is actually, and what are the actual facts for us? Because, you know, we'll have all sorts of questions from residents, just like yourselves, asking all those reasonable questions. Councillors will be asking those questions, and I'll have to actually answer those questions myself about what is the point of me arranging to collect this in Cheltenham? What are the benefits?
Because the
And
other,
we'll have
the
to
other
do
thing
that
that someone said
analysis.
was washing the materials out. So we're going to be consuming quite a lot of water to wash out bags
The
that
reality
we might be
is-
recycling, and it doesn't have any material benefit in recycling.
How much of that did you wash out?
So the reality is, this has been sitting in my house for a couple of months waiting for this, because we gathered it up. There is no smell to any of this, and I have to say though, there isn't, you know, where you have chicken breast and you peel off that, there isn't any of that in here, for obvious reasons, because I'd have had to have washed it off. However, in Cheltenham, there will be some residents who are very happy to wash absolutely everything. There are other residents that are time poor and won't wash anything. So those are also considerations that we need to factor into what you can and can't collect. And at the moment, we haven't got all the answers. We're here at the very cusp of what we're doing and trying to move forward. So did you have a question, Pete? No.
I did.
Yeah,
You
and then
mentioned several times that the waste from Javelin Park goes to electricity. I thought that incinerator was not built to take it to electricity? Is it,
Well,
does it?
Gloucester County Council operate that site, and I'm advised that they generate electricity enough to power something like Stroud. So that was my messaging. So on the website for Javelin Park, they'll give you all the answers, but my understanding is that is generating electricity. So I'm happy to take that away and come back and confirm to you guys what the actual fact is for Gloucester County Council, but that's not a Cheltenham Borough Council facility.
No, I understand that,
We just
but
take
when
that
it was
waste
built, part of the argument against it was that it wasn't going to do that. So, but you mentioned it 3 times, so I just wondered
So
whether
that's
there
my
was
understanding.
a
It's
change.
energy from waste, so it's generating
Okay.
energy
When
from
I
that
visited
waste.
it, Peter, it was generating. The whole plant was powered by its own power, as well as exporting some.
Yeah.
Not much, because it's not very good.
But I'm happy to take that away, Felicity, and send a link to any information on that with Gloucester County Council, no problem. Sorry, you had another question about?
Just one, the other thing I'm thinking is, does this incentivise retailers and consumers to effectively purchase more plastic? So will we end up in a world where we have more plastic because we're recycling plastic?
I think it's a very valid point, and one of the things, in terms of the Environment Act 21, there are lots of parallel strands to that. Some of them is around the requirements on local authorities to collect a consistent set of materials, including this. The other things are around actually what you do with deposit return schemes, what you also do with producer responsibility around what they're actually dealing with packaging. So there'll be all those requirements on them to make sure that what they're producing is recyclable. Now there's a lot of debate around how that's going to pan out at the moment. They haven't given us any guidance, so I think we're all waiting with bated breath to understand what that's going to mean. But you're right, there are a lot of parallel strands to all this, and this just happens to be one of them. And what we thought we would like to do is not only share with you about Plastics for Cheltenham, but actually what were your thoughts around this? And it's been really helpful in terms of some of the views you've got, because actually you might have gone to one session and everybody said, oh, that's a jolly good idea, without thinking of any of those sorts of issues, which you've really helpfully brought up. But those are the sorts of things we're going to have to make sure we cover as part of everything, which is quite obvious around the carbon element of it, the environmental impacts around everything we're doing associated with that, as well as the cost to us. But the question around here for us tonight was actually, if we're going to do it for you guys, assuming we can square all of that, and that's where we're looking at, assuming we square all that, then I might get to the point we can't, in which case we don't do it. But I don't know how that places us, given we've got a requirement by the government to do it by law by 27, so that's an interesting point too. But assuming we square all of that, actually, how do we make this work for you guys, in terms of all those words we've used to describe that, how we would put messaging out for you, and that's for anybody that's, you think about the different types of people that live in Cheltenham. They have got different reading skills, they've got a different sort of educational background, they have a whole range of different activities, which mean, they might be really busy at work, they've got lots of children and are really time poor, or actually working a couple of jobs to pay the mortgage. How do we make sure we message those people to make sure they can actually participate in that as much as anybody that's retired and has perhaps got a bit of time to do the washing out? There's lots of things, as you can see, that people have in their lives which dictate what they do with their recycling boxes, let alone something else we're thinking of introducing, like the crinkly and the flexible and the stretchy and the strange things like that. So,
And what do you do about the stuff that looks like plastic but is actually not? It's made of, sort of glucose and potato starch and all that sort of thing. What happens when that gets in there? Is that all right?
At the moment, when our reprocessors aren't overly impressed with that because it causes them problems with the reprocessing. So that is difficult. And when we say things are starch and compostable, actually it depends on what kind of industrial compost you've got as to whether that works. So that is another complexity. So happy to part with that one.
But it's a bag. So
Yeah,
if you start and put bags in
It is. Same with coffee cups. Some of those are.
My National Trust magazine comes in one of those every whatever it is. What do I do with it?
Yeah. So would you be thinking of putting that in there, Ollie?
No.
See?
Simple answer is no.
They tell you not to put it in that, don't they? They tell you to put it in that. According to what the local authority says, they tell you to put it in one of the old compost when the food bin.
But it's not food.
No.
It's not food waste.
A lot of them are made from starch-like products, aren't they? Which is recycled.
I put all my food waste on my compost heap, so I don't have a food bin at all.
Yeah.
I don't put out a food bin because it all goes.
So across Cheltenham, what we really like is actually to really reduce the amount of food waste we've got to get all together. So people aren't buying food and wasting it and having to throw it away. But there will always be some things that you're going to have to throw away. And if you can compost it, that's great. Not everybody is in a position to do that. So if actually you've got food waste, then at least let's have it in the food candy and we can actually do something useful with it.
But I'm reluctant to put those bags on my compost heap because then they start flying around.
I certainly would do it at home.
They're fine. You chuck them up for it, they soon rot.
Oh, there you go. That's the top tip for the day, I'd say. Actually, chop them up small and
Chop
see if
them up.
they Homes quickly.
This stuff, when you've collected it, call it whatever you will it be reprocessed here? Because the one thing I found shocking tonight is the percentage that's going to Germany.
Yes.
And I worry about the carbon footprint. It's like plastic bags turning up in Turkey and Malaysia. You know, we shouldn't be exporting our waste. And
So-
that really,
Yeah.
what is the carbon footprint of my waste going to Germany?
So what we ideally need is some investment in this country in terms of reprocessing facilities so we can deal with it all on our own shores. In an
And
ideal
are we
world.
pushing for that?
Yes.
Well, we're all lobbying the government to try and do that. I mean, a lot of it comes down to funding and in long-term plans, but the more we can lobby them to do that, the better it's going to be. Because, for example, we go back to the Tetra Pak question earlier. There are very few places that I could send Tetra Pak if I collected it at the moment. It would cost an arm and a leg. We couldn't afford to do it. And actually, there's a very small outlet for that at the moment. But actually, going down the line, one would hope that packaging changes shape so we don't have these complicated materials which are so difficult to recycle. But going down the line, we need to have that investment in infrastructure to make sure that whatever we do collect, assuming we've got all the carbon footprint considerations and all those other things that have been quite rightly raised tonight, sorted and squared, we need to be able to reprocess them without having to ship them overseas. I absolutely agree. But that requires investment locally in this country as well as locally on our doorstep sort of thing.
So if we can demonstrate that we can collect thousands of tonnes of flexible plastic a year from a range of different authorities, someone's going to build a facility in the UK to reprocess it, and it will be a better market option than sending it to Germany, be lower carbon. So that's, the aims of doing this investigation work is to demonstrate the need for more reprocessors in the UK. So we do have some, and obviously there are the ones working with Tesco's and Co-op at the moment. More are coming online this year. So there's plants being built in Scotland, in Wales, but it's small scale at the moment. If we can start demonstrating that we can collect thousands of tonnes of material a year just from 15 local authorities, there's how many local authorities? 300 and something?
Oh yes, not quite 400 yet.
Yeah, almost 400 local authorities in the UK. So that's tens of thousands of tonnes of flexible plastic every year. Don't know where to go next.
Is polystyrene excluded from this?
It is.
Yes.
It's a
Very
tricky
difficult
one.
material.
Very tricky one. I don't like polystyrene. So one over there.
Yeah, I mean, to the point that's been made earlier, if and when we go down this road, there needs to be some careful watching of other data, such as what is happening at the supermarket and store end with packaging. Because I'm afraid I'm fairly cynical that I suspect already there's a sense that it's easier and it's cheaper for us to collect some of this stuff back than it is to actually look at how we package it and in the first place and whether we need to do it in this way. So once this is in place, 2 years after that, I will be interested in the statistic of how supermarket packaging has changed in those 2 years. Because my rather depressed guess is that they'll say, don't have to bother about that anymore. The customer's doing it and dealing with it at the kerbside. In which case we'll have achieved, well, I was going to say nothing, worse than that actually.
And you're right, and that's the dilemma. We need government regulation, don't we, on the producers of that type of packaging to make sure it's the right thing. Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a lady there, wasn't there?
Sorry, sort of taking it off slightly, but you said you promised that nothing goes like into the sea or of the plastic, but if you're sending it abroad, what guarantees are there that those companies are not doing that? Where's the checks on that?
So in terms of the waste data flow requirements through DEFRA, we have to say what our end destinations are. So we have to go to a certain point. There is always going to be a point beyond which actually we don't have all that control. But as far as we can tell, and all the due diligence that we do, actually we use reputable companies and we do know where their end destination is. So actually, in the main, as I say, in Europe and the UK, it gets turned into that sort of thing, which is a valuable commodity to actually feed the production of more of these types of things. So because it's a value to it, it's not going to be ditched as like the Malaysian plastic bag mountains, as it were. So because it gets reprocessed into something which is a valuable commodity, for something like this, actually, that does secure it not ending up in that sort of trauma. But I understand what you're saying, but as far as we can tell, and I'm passionate about making sure that I wouldn't be stood here today if I thought there was any doubt that any of our stuff was going to land anywhere like you're suggesting. So, as far as I can tell, it's not happening, and I'll be horrified if we ever find it was. But because it's being processed into that sort of thing, there is a value to that. So somebody's going to sell that on to somebody that wants to turn it into something like that, or a flower pot, or another margarine tub, or anything like that, really. Is there another question at the back? Shall I see somebody with a hand at the back, or what?
I'm just confused about, you give out a copy
example here, actually. So that's got foil inside it to keep it extra fresh. There's some funny stuff on the outside, but according to the definitions of where we are with the government and flexibles, we think that's going to be included in that. So that would be part and parcel of what we're talking about trying to collect somehow here. But not all this is something that we're looking at down the line. How are we going to achieve that? And if we can make all those difficult questions stack up, we're very keen to try and make sure that we could try and introduce that and help the government's learning, help encourage the investment in the infrastructure that we need to do the right thing for the planet fundamentally. But we don't have all the answers at the moment. We're on the cusp of this journey, so we want to really sound you guys out in terms of actually what would work for you, what would be the issues, so that anything we then go down the line and suggest, actually, we've got the right shape first and we dip our toe in the water to start with, so I understand it doesn't necessarily cover the economies of scale thing, but we'd make sure from a local authority point of view, like the coffee pods. So the coffee pod scenario with Podback, that doesn't cost the local authority or you a penny. That is all self-funding. So we get money from Podback for actually collect towards the cost of collection. And the way we keep collections low is actually we've got those vehicles that you saw with lots of different compartments. They cost about £138,000 each, plus the cost of the crew. That's 3 people in there usually. What can we maximise in terms of what we're collecting while they're out and about anyway? Because we don't increase the carbon footprint and emissions as a result of that. And hopefully before too long, all our internal combustion engine vehicles that are out collecting waste and recycling will move to HVO. So they'll move away from diesel to HVO, which will help even further. But coffee pods, and this is how we're looking at this as well initially, trying to make sure that it doesn't cost us any money or the local authority. So a bit like the coffee pods, actually the cost of collection and where we sort it at the depot, it goes off to be reprocessed. It genuinely is being recycled, that material, including the food that's inside it, because the biggest bulk of what's in a coffee pod is actually the coffee grounds that are left. It doesn't cost us anything, so just to reassure you, we're not looking at trying to throw a load of money at something on a whim or on a very small scale, something which is going to be overly expensive. We're going to make sure we do that as cheaply as possible, and we're looking to try and make sure we don't actually cost the authority any money when we do that. So that's why we're dipping our toe in the water carefully to see where we go on that. But until all those questions have been answered satisfactorily and robustly, we won't be moving forward. So you have my assurance on that. So the lady in the pink, you had your hand up.
I was just wondering about the technology of recycling all these things. Is it known? Because up till now we've been told we can only recycle soft plastic bags, and now we can add crinkly stuff and the coffee. And
pick that one up, Ollie?
Yes, it's the same process. It depends on where it gets sent to. So for flexible plastic, there's really 3 different options. You have mechanical recycling, which is a mechanical process that turns it into flaked products like this. So to the actual recycling process, plastic bag isn't much different to a crinkly, trying to find an example. Something that's slightly more crinkly, that's more like a plastic bag, but yeah, there you go, it's sort of a more crinkly type plastic. Process doesn't matter, it's all PE or PP, it doesn't matter terminology.
So why have we not been recycling?
Because it just takes time, and there wasn't enough investment in infrastructure, but now more and more things are coming online, so we can introduce these new material streams at first through the supermarkets, but that is definitely seen as a sort of a part-time solution. So that, we will be moving on to curbside collections. But so you've got your mechanical recycling, which turns it into products like that. There's also something coming online at the moment called chemical recycling, which breaks down these films and flexibles and crinkly plastics and foil-based plastics into the oils and kind of polymers that they're made from. We can then use those oils and polymers. I say we, it's not something we do, but the process that the companies that do that can use those oils and polymers to create new products as if they were using virgin plastics. Really, really clever process. And it wasn't there 10 years ago, but technology comes on. The other thing we can do is we can shred this and we can use it as insulation in a sofa or in a mattress or in a wall. That's not a very good solution. We're not really looking to do that. It's technically downcycling, it's not circular, it doesn't go round and round and round again. So we're trying to favour that mechanical recycling or chemical recycling. So many different options, there's so many different companies coming up with new, innovative ways of doing things, and we're trying to work with all of them, kind of collate all of that knowledge at the moment.
Any other questions you want to pose, Ollie?
I think they covered it.
Yeah,
I think so.
Is there anything else that's burning in terms of, were we to say next Monday, say, from your households, actually you can put it into something like that, or we might give you something like that, which isn't an ideal solution, would be a short-term one, so you're then putting it out. Are there any obvious things that you would think of that would actually cause you a problem at home in trying to do this? Assuming we can give you enough messaging which says the crinkly, the flexible, the sort of stretchy can go in there. We've got some good visuals which say actually this is the sort of thing you can put in there. Is there anything burning that anybody can think of that's going to be a real prohibitive factor for you? There's a hand up down the road back before we move to the front.
Not a prohibitive factor necessarily, but will it be made very clear what the tolerance is for sort of it being a bit mucky? So at the moment in my house, I take things to the supermarket. I'm the only one in the family that does it, all probably much like you, so I'm washing all of it up and I'm thinking, goodness, all of this water that I'm potentially wasting doing all this washing up. And I'm probably overdoing it. And probably it doesn't need to be as clean as I'm making it. So will that be really clear? Because we don't want people probably doing what I'm doing, which is washing it unnecessarily, if that's just wasting water.
That's a really valid point. We'll have to make sure we're really clear on the messaging to make sure people don't waste water doing unnecessary washing out things that's not required.
Would you say that you shouldn't put the food, you know, the film that comes off meat, would you say that that shouldn't be put in there? I mean, obviously you would wash it, if you washed it, it's clean, like other tubs and things, that would be alright. Or would you suggest it's better not to put it in?
I mean, I would put it in. I'd probably dip it in my dirty washing up bowl after I've done the washing up. I wouldn't run the sink just to give it a scrub. I would just dunk it, shake it off, and put it in the bag.
So it's not going to smell and get revolting?
No, I mean, if you're filling up a bag once a week, I don't know how often you empty your bins, but you take it out when it's full.
Yeah.
It shouldn't cause too much of an issue if you're keeping it in a cupboard in your household, and if you're storing it in a bag outside. At the end of the day, the reprocessors aren't going to struggle too much with a little bit of contamination. They're not going to mind the odour that much. You should see the odours they have to deal with at some sorting facility. So a little bit of chicken or a little bit of cat food left in the pouch isn't going to be the end of the world. Try and get most of it out.
The reality is, in August, assuming we have a nice summer, and you've got a bag of that sort of thing you're gathering up somehow, you're not going to gather it and keep it somewhere if it's smelly, are you? So there's something we're going to have to do to make sure people, because there are some automatic prohibitors, aren't there? If it stinks, you're not going to want it in your house. And if it's actually outside your back door where you're storing it, and it's smelly, you're going to be really disensitised from doing it. So it's what messaging we can give to people to make sure that it's something which is acceptable. Most people have baked bean cans and gosh knows what they'll put in these boxes with their plastic pots, tubs and trays. And actually some people wash them out, some people don't. So people have got different tolerances to what they're prepared to do and what they're not prepared to do with these sorts of things. So it's us striking a balance in terms of what we can actually usefully accept to do something useful with it, rather than saying actually it has to go to energy for waste, rather than being, you know, in our circular economy and being recycled again.
Question about film. What about the
Sorry, we're at this for time.
We'll just ask, maybe this is the last question.
There's a lady over there, so that
Sorry,
was
maybe two
yeah.
questions then.
What about cling film?
Cling film, I think some of this stuff in here is equivalent to cling film, and that's what not at the moment, but that's what we're looking at in terms of flexibles. So clinging could be another description for this stuff too, couldn't it? I mean, there's a whole range of adjectives. Sorry.
Yes, you asked for advice on what would be an issue for people in collecting things. And what I think would be an issue is to have more boxes, so that, and especially for some people who haven't got much space outside their houses, terraced houses, and the like, you know, they don't want masses of great big boxes. So what I think would be helpful is if whatever is given to us along the lines of the cardboard things, whether they can be put in one of the boxes, or whatever method we use, that it can be combined with the other boxes rather than have a separate thing, separate box.
And in reality, in terms of when you walk up and down the streets on collection day, you see people do all sorts of things because it suits their own household in terms of how they do things. And sometimes they'll have one box, sometimes they'll have 6, 7, 8. I mean, you see all sorts of things. And in terms of what they do with cardboard, sometimes some people don't want a cardboard bag, they actually use one of the boxes. In terms of where they put their textiles in a tight carry bag to keep it dry, they will sit it on top of the box, other people will sit it inside. So I think what we would want to try and do is actually give people the flexibility, if you excuse the pun, around where you put it. So actually, if you've only got one carry bag's worth, shall we say, of something, and you've got space in one of your boxes, well, why can't you put it in there with the lid on? Because actually when the crews take the lid off, they'll see it and that's fine. If you've got quite a lot of it, because you've got a big household, then actually you might want to put it in one separate box. But if it spills over that, actually, would you want some sort of bag, shall we say, like the blue cardboard bag, but in a different colour to put it in? So there's lots of ways of actually achieving that. And you're right, actually, I mean, if you're talking about people in flats, you don't have so much space, it's slightly different, you haven't got a backyard in the same way necessarily. There's lots of things that we're going to have to consider as part of that, but space is going to be an absolute constraint. I can't agree with you on that. Sorry, Felicity, are we overrunning?
No, not at all, no. Well, there's a lot here. I'm going to ask you the final question for you, both of you.
Yep.
Is really, do you feel you've got what you needed from this evening? Because you were asking us for our input. So what do you take away from it?
I mean, from my point of view, it's been really helpful to have some really honest feedback, because that's what we need. Because if we're going to do it at all, because we can square all the questions that we've sort of raised about carbon footprint and costs, etc., we need to make sure we're doing it right for residents. Because it's no good it suits me at home, because actually your homes are all quite different from mine in terms of the way you operate. We need to make sure it works for the collective to actually be successful and people can participate easily. So I think thank you hugely for all the honest feedback we've got. I think we've got some QR codes down there which actually take you to our website, which tells you what we do with our recycling in Cheltenham, and lots of information about what you can and can't put in, if anybody wants that. It's all on the Cheltenham Borough Council's website. If you look at bins and recycling, it just takes you to the relevant pages under that section. So if anybody wants that, feel free. There are some pod back leaflets there. There are some chewing gum leaflets, interesting, little holders there, interesting. But you say, actually, why is chewing gum relevant for things like that? Actually, there's lots of it's plastic in some things like that sometimes. Actually, we don't want that in the water courses. So there's also indigestion leaflets there for anybody's interested in one of those in terms of what happens with your food. But what I would say actually is cleangreen@cheltenham.gov.uk, or the general customer services email address for the attention of Karen. Any questions, any queries you want to raise, or something you think about when you go home, feel free to come back to us, or through Felicity, and a big thank you to Cheltenham King's Futures for hosting this. But more than happy to take any questions, any thoughts you've got, and we'll come back to you on that. If there's anything specific over and above what we've covered today, because it's been a real whistle-stop tour, and I make no apology, it's a huge area. Recycling generally is a huge area. Then if you just look at plastics, and then if you look at flexibles or crinkly or stretchy or whatever we're calling it, that's quite a big subject as well. So more than happy to do anything that works for Felicity and CK Futures on that going forward, or for anything else. But a big thank you. And I think, Ollie, have you got anything that you think actually you can take away? Because I think it's probably lots here.
Yeah, I think I can take away a lot. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably want to put your flexibles in a bag so it doesn't blow away, and you want to have flexibility to put it either in your box or your bag, or order another container if you've got loads of them. And obviously make sure that it's reprocessed and recycled in the UK, and that we tell you what to do with loads and loads of examples about exactly what can go in, rather than just saying flexible or crinkly.
A big thank you for turning out, so I really do appreciate that, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Before you go, just a few things. You'll find on here that we have the CK Futures information, so as Karen mentioned, if you do want to get in touch with us. We're also very keen, we put these on every month, and we do it to try and respond to your requirements. So if you want us to, ask for a speaker or anything like that, please just let us know. And the email's on here, or just email the parish council. Also, Karen mentioned a couple of other things. We've been running a food waste campaign, so for those of you who know about it, we've every couple of we've been dealing with what we call a couple of letters, and this week we've got to organised, and talking about organised meal planning and things like that. What I took away from this, I don't know about other people, is we could actually help Karen and Ollie by actually reducing what's in there, let alone trying to find a way to actually get rid of it. So in other words, it's also about what we do as consumers. And so thinking about food waste, thinking about what we buy and how we buy it is all part of this. So actually spending lots of money, I mean, it's not that we're not going to do it on technology and everything, but it'd be great if we could spend the money on other things. So maybe we should just be thinking about that other step. So actually towards the end of the year, we're going to be running a campaign called Conscious Consumerism, which all sounds a bit heavy, but actually it's just about making us think about what we buy, how we can reuse, etc. I've got a load of stuff here, haven't I? Cheltenham is introducing its first community fridge through Planet Cheltenham. It's going to be, hopefully, forgive the pun, opened on the 23rd of April up at the front on Six Ways. And again, it's very much a collaborative effort. But getting a community fridge into Cheltenham is a big step forward. It's going to be part of a network that they hope to bring 2 or 3 others in. And again, it's helping people, particularly in food poverty, but also it allows us not to be throwing stuff away. A couple of up and coming and really important, the home energy saving and retrofit sessions starting this weekend, 3rd of April. So there's leaflets up there. Peter here and Mike, they'll be part of these sessions, the 3rd of April, 9th of April, 17th and the 8th of May. And this will be up at St Paul's at Malthouse Lane at the workshop. If you want, especially these days at the moment, we need to be much more savvy about insulation, energy, etc. So please come along. And finally, our next talk at the end of April, last Wednesday in April, composting worm poo and comfrey tea. So Mike's going to take us through that. Again, I hope that you'll get something from that. I'm really interested about this. And also I gather that Mike's going to then take whoever's interested to take some actual practical sessions. So we're not going to have all the compost laid out here. Anyway, thank you again for coming this evening. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you.